Hey everyone, I'm here in the National Cemetery. That's the Soldiers National Monument behind me in the distance. At the time of the battle, the area now occupied by the National Cemetery was a cornfield, and its elevation provided an excellent vantage point for artillery. The original plan for the cemetery, laid out by landscape architect William Saunders, called for a series of semicircles holding the graves of federal soldiers, centered by a large memorial, and graves were grouped by state. It's interesting to note that officers and enlisted men lie side by side with no distinction of rank. It was important to Saunders that no fallen soldier should be held in higher esteem than any other. In those cases where the fallen soldier's unit and state couldn't be determined, the body was buried in one of two sections here dedicated to unknown soldiers. And of the more than 3,500 federal soldiers buried here, nearly 1/3 have never been identified. Well, the bodies of Confederate soldiers generally were buried where they lay or in mass graves. But in the early 1870s, efforts spearheaded by ladies' memorial associations, efforts were made to return all the Confederate dead to the South for burial, and more than 3,000 bodies were transferred. As with their counterparts in blue, a large number of rebel dead were never identified, and as a result, it's thought as many as 10 misidentified Confederate soldiers may have been reinterred with the federal dead here in the National Cemetery, where they remain to this day. Also here in the National Cemetery is the Lincoln Speech Memorial. In 1895, the legislation creating Gettysburg National Military Park also contained a provision for a monument commemorating Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The central figure is the bust of Lincoln, flanked by two bronze plaques. The plaque on the right contains his Gettysburg Address, while the one on the left is a copy of the letter sent by David Wills inviting Lincoln to Gettysburg. Contrary to popular belief, though, the monument doesn't sit on the exact location of the speaker's platform on the day of the speech in November 1863. The platform was actually located in Evergreen Cemetery, several yards on the opposite side of the wrought iron fence that separates the two cemeteries today. Located in Evergreen Cemetery, next door to the National Cemetery, is the Gettysburg Women's Memorial, which was dedicated in 2002 and is meant to honor all the women who served here at Gettysburg in any capacity during and after the battle. It depicts Elizabeth Thorne. Before the war, Elizabeth's husband, Peter, was employed as the cemetery's caretaker. At the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, Elizabeth was 31 years old and living in the cemetery's gatehouse with her elderly parents and 3 young children. Peter was serving in a Pennsylvania regiment posted at Harper's Ferry during the battle here at Gettysburg. Elizabeth cooked and baked for federal soldiers on the first day of the battle until she and her family were forced to evacuate because of the heavy shelling. When she returned, she found devastation. And despite being 6 months pregnant, she personally buried almost 100 bodies. Working in the July heat, the only assistance she got was from her parents. And the monument shows her leaning on her shovel, taking a short break from that unpleasant task. Well, Elizabeth continued to run the cemetery until 1865, when her husband came home from the war. They stayed here at Evergreen Cemetery until 1874. It's interesting that Elizabeth's Gettysburg memoirs, written many years later, are considered among the best civilian accounts of the battle. She died in 1907 and is buried here in the cemetery she called home throughout the war.